Wants to make sure she votes against the wrong stuff. Make sure she votes against the right stuff. No, she's getting her sewer stuff sorted out, so she. 2 minutes? I guess I better wait. What's your clock say?
Mine says 6:59.
Your light's not on. Should we say that?
Well, you have to figure out a way.
I guess the greens tonight are best suited for goose. Geese.
Because I'm assuming that's what it is.
Good evening and welcome. Good evening. I'd like to call to order our regular meeting of council for Wednesday, May 3rd, 2017, and it's exactly 7 p.m. One of my councillors just wondered out loud to me if it was a warm, sunny evening, if we'd have as good an attendance, or whether the greens would be busier with golfers. But with the wet rain, I can only assume that the greens are best left to the geese. But we'll get to that in about 5 or 10 minutes. First, we'll look at the agenda which was circulated and ask if there's any additions or deletions to the agenda as circulated. And if not, a motion to adopt. Councillor Lutz and Councillor Seegers. All those in favor? That's carried. And we move to the first item on the agenda, which is Mr. Pakaluk regarding the Blue Ocean Golf Club request for the District of Sechelt Firearm and Bow Regulatory Bylaw exemption. And if you'd like to come forward and pull the microphone up, and then we'll get it on so you can be heard by others and recorded. And welcome.
Can you hear me all right?
Perfect.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council, for this opportunity to meet with you. As you can see, I didn't come alone. Our members take this goose problem very seriously. We've had it for too long. You have already significant information about this issue, so I'll try not to duplicate. The purpose of our presentation is to respectfully request the Council to reconsider their April 19 decision on an exception to the Firearms Bylaw number 487 for Blue Ocean Golf Club to scare and chase geese off their property. Our basis for the decision reconsideration is we've read the staff report of April 10th on this subject, and we believe at least 2 corrections need to be brought to your attention. The first one, there are significant health, safety, and economic issues related to the goose poop problem at the golf course that were not mentioned in the report. Annual lease payments to the district are based on a percentage of the green fees green fee revenues, and the goose problem very negatively affects these green fees. Off-coast visitors, golfers, when they get goose poop on their shoes and clothes, very few of them ever come back. So this creates a fairly significant economic problem for the golf course. The economic viability of the golf course is really severely threatened. With so much goose poop on the golf course, soiled clothing, shoes, and golf carts, when loaded into cars and other vehicles, spreads the health issue a whole lot further than the golf course. Secondly, there's a very limited liability to the district to allow the scaring and chasing of geese. Local RCMP, the local conservation officer, and the federal wildlife authorities support our careful scaring of the geese. Thirdly, district staff may not be aware of the restrictions that the RCMP put on the scaring and chasing of geese on the golf course property. These restrictions are, first, the RCMP, the conservation officer, and the Kinnickinnick school principal must be notified before any shots are fired. Scaring and chasing of geese can only take place very early in the day before any golfers come to the course, or later in the day when all of the golfers have left. All hunters must be interviewed by the local RCMP and have their credentials checked. We have 4 highly qualified and licensed hunters. Hunters' backs must be towards the school and the park before any and all shots are fired. The RCMP will stop all goose scaring and chasing if there are any legitimate complaints. It's critical to note that the scaring and chasing of geese on the golf course has been successfully carried out for 15 years, from 2001 to 2015 inclusive, without any complaints. It's also worth noting that the federal wildlife damage permit normally limits us to killing only 4 to 6 geese per year. We therefore recommend that council make an exception to bylaw 487 to allow Blue Ocean Golf Club to scare and chase geese on the golf club property. If you have any questions, I'll try to answer them.
Okay, we'll see if councillors have any clarifications, and then I'll try and give you a summary of the thinking that went into the decision. It's fairly unusual to have somebody come in 2 weeks after we've made a decision to talk about it again, but the last meeting actually was in camera for a number of reasons because of considerations of risk and liability to the district. So one of the reasons I invited you, and I think it's good for you to come back, is so that you can actually hear the thinking that went into the decision. It was a fairly clear decision by council. It was a divided council, but still clear and firm. And it's not one that I suspect we'll be reconsidering easily, but I will give an avenue for that as well. But first, if there's any clarifications of the presentation.
Actually, this is a question to staff, not to the presenters. I was just curious if there were any other additional requests to vary the firearm bylaw by any other user groups in the district.
No, Your Worship.
Okay. And then additionally, do we have any type of a letter on record by any of the public health professionals here indicating that there's a problem with goose feces on our fields or golf greens? Does anybody know if that's been included? Okay, thanks.
Okay. Any other clarifications while Len is with us? Mr. Councillor Shanks.
Yeah, I think the staff report alluded to the fact that other golf courses have had the same issue and been able to resolve it. So I'm not sure if there was any follow-up in terms of how they were able to resolve it, either by staff or by the golf course people.
Can I speak to that?
Yes, you have that as additional notes here. Yeah.
We've tried using dogs. In fact, one of our mower operators had 2 border collies that she trained, and the dogs scared the geese into the water, and some of the geese moved the dog into the water. They tried to drown the dog, and the mower operator had to go in the water to rescue her dog. So that wasn't a very successful means of getting rid of the geese. We tried bangers or noisemakers. All they do is move the geese from one section of the golf course to another. And because we have several water hazards, that's basically what they do, fly from one water hazard to another. So we've not found that to be very successful. Back in 2000, before we got a damage report from the federal wildlife people, we searched on the internet, and there's some people in the States who sell gooserators, and this is a remote control device that is manually operated to scare the geese. The price back in 2000 was $3,000 US. So you need money and an operator continuously to move them, because I suspect the gooserator would just move them from one water hazard to another. So we don't have the money nor the operator to commit to this on a daily basis to keep the geese away. The geese really respond to seeing one of their own shot. They're very smart. When they see one go down, they move away pretty quickly, and they move off the golf course. And as the people at Federal Wildlife Service say, they understand this, our problem and how geese operate. So when they issue a damage permit to us, they require us to only shoot, as I say, 4 to 6 geese a year. And that's all it takes. So we think it's a pretty simple solution. We did it for 15 years without any problems. So, well, no complaints. So, and the RCMP make it very clear, if there's any complaints, legitimate complaints, they'll shut us down. So we think it's a pretty simple solution.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm still under the impression that other golf courses have been able to get rid of the problem, and I'm not sure how, judging from the report we got. So
We've made contact with other courses, and the successful ones use bangers or shotguns.
okay. So my logical question is, why not eliminate the water hazard? and put netting over it or something like that.
Lots of us would like to eliminate the hazards on the course. It might improve our game. Okay, that was in humor. Just so you know, the council did spend probably 15 to 20 minutes discussing this issue, and with a full range of information, including the staff report. There was serious discussion about the community amenity that the golf course is, and the fact that that needs to be viable, and we want to make sure that's viable, so we heard that. There was serious discussion about whether or not it was a health hazard, and if it was a health hazard at the golf course, how that might also impact other places. And this is the key thing here, is that the golf course is not the only place on the Sunshine Coast with geese or with geese poop. And then there was also discussion about what other municipalities probably did. And then there was full discussion of the interests and skills of those who were involved, and the support you had in terms of the process from the federal government and the RCMP. And there was full discussion about whether geese were and should be considered pests, no different than any other pests that are eradicated, whether they be mosquitoes or rats or mice or geese. What's the difference? So there was a fairly full discussion of those issues. In the end of the day, Council considered that the health hazard was probably not real as opposed to imagined, and if it had been more significant, we would know about it through the schools and through the Chief Public Health Officer, Paul Mardiquet. There was also concern that this is not unique to the golf course, but is also shared by, for example, Chattelich School or the elementary school across the street. Both have similar problems, but they don't come and ask for exemptions. So in terms of a consistent approach across the district, the majority of council, and I did say it was a divided council, but it was a clear decision, but the majority of council confirmed that there would be no exemption granted at this time. So I respect your persistence and the fact that you brought it forth and asked us to reconsider. There's two ways that councils can normally bring issues back for reconsideration. One of them, the community charter allows for the mayor to bring something back within 30 days if he feels the decision was made in error or with inadequate information. And I sometimes have done that if it's a very serious issue and it was a very closely divided council. I think I've done it twice in my experience, once with this council and a couple of, maybe 3 times in total. And it's not something I do lightly. It's also possible for 2 members of council to bring something forward. Normally they have to be people who are, the mover has to be somebody who is on the prevailing side of the decision. We would waive that in this case, and I'll just say that having heard your representation tonight and seen your support in the community, if there are 2 members of this council who would send me an email to have this reconsidered, we would bring it back to another bylaw. So that's where I'll leave it. I think the council decision was clear, and I think council has to stand behind decisions they make, even when they're not easy. So that's our thinking tonight.
Could I make one additional comment?
Absolutely.
The other locations where they have some form of a goose problem rarely have water hazards. The sports field adjacent to the golf course, the geese might feed there, but their preference is to be around our water hazards. So I have reason to believe that the sports field and Kinnickinnick School Ground don't have nearly the problem we have because they don't have water hazards. And I rather suspect the same applies to the high school. I have a sneaking hunch that our water hazards are well used by a lot of geese for the whole of the Sechelt district. Mm-hmm. So we have, I think, a whole lot bigger health issue than some of the other folks who do have some geese on their property.
Yeah, we'll certainly take that into consideration, and if it's supported with evidence from Paul Mardiquet or somebody like that, then we would probably want to reconsider that. At the moment, we look at places like Mission Point Park, which also has a lot of geese nesting right in the estuary, as similar, not nearly to the extent, I don't think. It doesn't have as many water hazards as you have, but until there's stronger evidence, I don't know if council will reconsider, but I will leave this open to any 2 councillors who want to bring it back for another vote and another discussion. We can do that.
for any of the councilors that don't think we have a problem, I would like to invite them for lunch at the golf course. And before we have lunch, we'll go for a walk.
That's fair.
And bring your finest shoes, please.
Invitation. Yeah,
Okay,
thank you very much.
thank you.
And thank you for coming and watching this bit of the process. We do take it seriously, and councillors will be thinking about this as they go home tonight, and I'm sure that it'll be under discussion as one or two or three of them decide whether they're going to take the invitation of bringing it forward. However, the decision was fairly clear.
So what you're saying is you're not prepared to make a decision tonight?
We never make a decision for a delegation tonight, but no, I would not be prepared to tonight. I think that's unfair to the councillors.
When might we expect a decision?
I would think if it's coming back, it'll come back for the next council meeting in 2 weeks. And you'd be notified and the golf course would be notified. I'll know within 48 hours.
Okay, you recognize that springtime and geese will be laying eggs, and we'll have young ones, which will double the number of geese we have, so please, there's some urgency in the decision.
I think they understand that spring is a matter of urgency, both for starting the season and for the geese season.
Thank you for your time.
Yeah. And thank you for your persistence. No, but I made them up. I made them up. Any two councillors on the prevailing side, yes, I'm sure of that. But I don't, in this case, I don't care if you're prevailing or not. And we can reconsider it. You know, if, yeah, the two separate issues. The mayor under any consideration, or two on the prevailing side. Oh, it might only be the mover on the prevailing side, and somebody else can second it. It has to be two. At least one from the prevailing. No, it can't be two losers. It doesn't have to be the mover. Oh, it does. Just somebody on the prevailing side. So one of the, I think it was a 4-3. It might have been a 5-2. I didn't want to tell them. Yeah. No. That's what she was saying tonight. We can read. I have to read it. I didn't read it before I came up. I didn't read it. We're having backroom chat on the intricacies of the community charter and exactly how many councillors from which prevailing side, and whether it has to be somebody who moved it or seconded it or not. But we'll look that up. And I made the invitation, if it's any two councillors, doesn't matter which side. But for those who want to follow this kind of stuff, we normally don't reconsider things, because you don't want those on the losing side to keep bringing things back every 2 weeks and saying, let's reconsider this. But you do allow people to change their minds or have a sober second thought or saying, well, let's just think about this again. And that's what this would be. Now, moving on to item 4, which is proclamations. I don't know if it's related, but it's Meatless Monday. Whereas Meatless Mondays, and I was going to say something about proclamations. Proclamations are brought forward by members of the community who make requests, and we have a fairly loose definition. We want them to be local, if possible, as opposed to things that we get from national or international organizations. And almost any proclamation that comes forward and follows the process is accepted. And this one came to council as a presentation. Whereas Meatless Mondays was created at Johns Hopkins University in 2004 to inspire people to cut saturated fats from their diet in order to improve their health, because reducing our consumption of animal products and increasing our intake of fruits, vegetables, and legumes have been linked to a host of health benefits and may reduce the risk of chronic preventable conditions like cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and some cancers. And whereas eating vegetarian or vegan cuisine on Monday, June 12th will help to promote awareness across the Sunshine Coast for Meatless Monday, now therefore I, Bruce Milne, Mayor, do hereby proclaim that June 12th, 2017 shall be known as Meatless Monday in the district of Sechelt. Good. Yeah. It's on my schedule, but Mondays, Tuesdays, and Wednesdays are meatless in our house too. Proclamations, adoption of minutes, item 5.1. Minutes of the 3 p.m. regular council meeting of 19th. First, a motion to receive and adopt. Thank you. Any errors and omissions? That was Councillor Lutz, Councillor Seegers. All those in favor? And moving to item 5.2, minutes of the 7 p.m. meeting, which is starting on page 9 through to 21. Motion to receive, Councillor Lutz, Councillor Wright. Any errors or omissions?
Thank you.
Councillor Seegers.
Page 14. Second bullet from the top.
Yes.
As I recall, when this came forward, it was the fire department had some concerns. The concerns were addressed, but we received written confirmation from the proponent and not from the fire department. So this says a written notice may be required to confirm access is available. We would require a written notice from the fire department to indicate that the condition has been satisfied. And that needs to be added to the file.
It was put in the conditional future because staff weren't exactly sure whether it was on the file or not, I think at the time, but we are looking for that to be confirmed. And it's not so much that access from Hazelnut Lane is available, but that it's acceptable for emergency purposes.
Yes.
And it isn't for and other access. It's that access from Hazelnut Lane is acceptable for emergency purposes.
Thank you.
Any other errors or omissions? It's not really an omission, but I did notice that the report on page 13 under the report from Maria Stanborough was relatively brief. We brought her in to explain a wide number of things, especially things we wanted the community to hear about. And it wasn't simply those 2 bullets, so I was kind of surprised when we got to that, because part of the reason for her doing the public presentation was to help clarify some of the issues around SSC and why it was where it was. Corporate Officer Joanne Frank.
Perhaps just for clarification, Ms. Stamborough's PowerPoint presentation and the audio is available online, so we felt to do it justice, rather than pick and choose, we'd just put the whole thing online.
That's perfect. I thought we'd ask for that, so I'm glad that's there. Yeah, that's good. Thank you for that reminder. Any other errors or omissions in the minutes? Not, I'll look for a motion to adopt as amended. Councillor Seegers and Lutz, all those in favor? And that's carried. Moving to item 7.1, which are minutes of the Public Works. This one is just first a motion to receive. Councillor Lutz, Councillor Seegers. And any discussion, any items need to be pulled out. Otherwise, I'll look for a motion to endorse recommendations 3, 4, and 5. Councillor Seegers moves, seconded by Councillor Wright. Any discussion? All those in favor? That's carried. Thank you. And those were minutes of the March 22nd. They got lost for some reason. And also the minutes of Public Works, Parks and Environment Committee meeting of April 26th. Page 25, a motion to receive. Councillor Wright and Councillor Lutz, all those in favor? Any discussion of those? Councillor Seegers.
Thank you. On page 27. There's some verbiage in the first bullet.
Yes.
And then down at the
I
bottom,
think the first bullet may be just taking out the words "to." A certified environmental specialist submitted a report to DFO requesting beach access for these urgent repairs. On
yeah, I
behalf.
wasn't sure if they've already submitted it or if it was to be submitted.
No, it has been done.
Okay.
That's how we knew about it.
Okay, at the bottom of the page, second bullet. They completed a 3-page corresponding vessel of concern inventory data collection sheet on each vessel.
I don't know.
It was on each vessel. Because the ones, they only presented us with 2 of them, I think, at the meeting, but there was a 3-page report on each one of the vessels.
And is that what it's called? A corresponding vessel of concern?
Yes. That was the information that had to be submitted to,
So is it a capital
DFO.
C? Just curious. On each
I'm
vessel?
not sure.
So we'll add on each vessel?
On each
for
vessel.
sure. Okay. Any other discussion?
page 28, first bullet. That's the first bullet and the second bullet. So district does not own a boat, could not assist that were given to helpful boaters in the area. So the containment kits were given to boaters in the area?
Yep.
Okay, and then aboard this boat were multiple car batteries, cans of oil and diesel.
Aboard the sunk tug.
Yes. That's everything, thank you.
Is it still a boat when it's underwater? Aboard this former boat. Okay, if there's no further discussion, I'll look for somebody to move recommendations 3 to 6, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Councillor Lutz and Seegers. All those in favor? That's carried. And we have the District of Sechelt minutes of the Committee of the Whole. These are just for receipt and adoption and discussion, but first a motion to receive. Councillor Shanks and Wright. Any discussion of those minutes? Councillors? Or errors? Councillors?
Thank you. Top of page 32. Margaret Hodgkins, I think that's just a, it's correct through the rest of the report for her.
In the
That's it.
title?
Yes, in the title, yeah. That's it for corrections.
And a motion to adopt. Councillor Seegers and Lutz. All those in favor? And then moving to our minutes of the Special Finance, Culture and Economic Development Committee meeting of Wednesday, April 26th. First, a motion to receive. Councillor Seegers and Lutz and Wright. All those in favor? That's carried. Any discussion of those? And then I'll look for, I think there's an extra, a bit of numbering at the end of it. Page 41 and 42 both have a recommendation 13. And then I'll look for somebody to move recommendations 10 to 14, 10, 11, 12, 13, and 14. Councillor Wright and Councillor Seegers. All those in favor? That's carried. Thank you for that. We can go back and I can ask if there's any business arising from any of the minutes we've just dealt with in item 7, and Councillor Seegers.
Thank you. At the Committee of the Whole meeting, we had TRAC come and do a presentation to us, and they were offering to serve as a referral party for development applications that came forward. I'd like to make a motion that we add them to our list of referral sources or referral groups.
And Councillor Inkster is seconding, looked like. Any discussion of that? Councillor Inkster.
The good thing about that group is they look at alternative forms of transportation, so in many ways they would be encouraging us to look at those when we're putting plans together and or subdivisions, etc. My only question with them, and maybe others know better, is how often does that group meet in order to discuss any kind of referrals we put forward to them? Do they meet like a residents association once a month?
I don't know, but they do get referrals from the regional district, and they
Okay.
manage to manage those.
Okay, that's fair. Does the regional district have 1 month or 60-day turnaround in the case that we do sometimes, or is it a much longer
No,
period? Do we know?
it's often the same.
Okay,
So I guess if they can't respond within the time limits, they won't respond,
they won't respond. Okay.
or they'll ask for an extension and we'll consider it, our staff will.
Okay.
Any further discussion of the motion to add track to the referral on suitable developments? All those in favor? That's carried. Thank you for catching that and bringing it forward. And back to item 8 and bylaws. We have item 8.1, a 2-page report from the Director of Corporate and Financial Services. First, a motion to receive. Councillor Lutz and Wright. All those in favor? We always ask if you'd like to speak to these 1-page reports, but we always actually would like you to say something. Here's my report.
Thank you, Your Worship. So in the report, I simply summarized the budget process we went through this year, starting in September when staff started looking at the budgets. The FCD committee then got involved through November, December, right through February, where we presented the operating budget, the capital budget, the carry forward amounts, and the additional requests from community associations and from staff. On February 27th, we had the public input session, the town hall meeting, where we received more input, received a number of other queries online, mostly comments rather than suggestions, but we certainly looked at everything that was received. And then the FCD committee began its real deliberations starting on March 8th, on the 15th, the 22nd, April 5th, April 12th, and April 26th. And finally on, I guess that was the last meeting, to consider all the information received. And the culmination of all those meetings is the bylaws in front of you to consider tonight.
Thank you very much. That's a good process. And I'd look then for somebody on council to move recommendations 1.2 through to 1.6. Councillor Mueller and Councillor Lutz. Any discussion of those recommendations? And they'll come forward as bylaws in a moment. All those in favor? That's carried. And then moving into the actual work that we just recommended we do. We'll start with bylaw number 557, 2017, a bylaw to adopt the financial plan for the years 2017 to 2021. Do I have somebody to move first reading? Councillor Mueller and Councillor Wright. All those in favor of first reading? And we do have the schedule B, C, and D. We can have questions at first reading, and we can have amendments at second reading. Councillor Seegers.
Thank you. On page 46, and I provided these to the staff ahead of time. Didn't give them much notice, but I have given them notice. On page 46, I noticed that when we go from 2017 to 2021 with the numbers, they're all increasing as we go along. I assume you've taken some kind of factor and added it in. But I noticed for planning and community development and for public works under 2018, both those numbers actually decreased. So I'm wondering why they didn't follow the same pattern the rest did.
Is this for expenses?
Yes, sorry, under expenses, yes.
Director of Corporate Services.
Thank you, Your Worship. So Councillor Seegers is correct. We basically use a factor to inflate expenses, primarily using an inflation factor of 2%, just to be able to understand what will be happening with the tax rates, to give you an idea of context, and putting in the wage increases negotiated through the collective agreement. Also in the budget, though, in 2017, for both planning and public works are some one-time expenses, so they don't carry over into 2018, sorry. So in the planning community development, it's the ICSP project for $70,000. So it's a one-time expenditure, so it doesn't carry over into the future years. So the budget will go down for that particular area. And for the public works and area, it's the Davis Bay float for $20,000 and the Parks Master Plan for $50,000. And again, they're deemed one-time expenditures and won't continue.
Thank you. On page 47. Under
Yes.
revenue generated, fees, rates, and sale of services, I noticed the amounts are the same all the way across. And I know we talked about actually addressing septage. So is that part of the fees, rates, and sale of services under the sewer operating plan there? And if so, why are we not seeing an increase?
So, Your Worship, yes, that does include the septage amount. Basically, as the bylaw, the analysis hasn't been done yet, so I kept it flat for the 5 years, and once the bylaw is adopted, it'll be reflected in future financial plans.
Okay. Do you want to see if others have questions before I go on?
Can I ask you to clarify the response on the public works for 2017 one-time items? Is the Davis Bay Wharf still in there? Float? I thought that was actually taken out at our last discussion.
It's the $20,000 study that council asked us to
Okay.
include to look at the
Study.
possible things. So they're deemed operating expenses, not capital.
Thank you. And any other questions of the financial plan at first reading? Councillor Seegers?
Okay, I have a few more here. On page 40,
Each.
48.
Okay.
Sorry, I gotta turn this sideways, it's really small. Page 48, right at the bottom, it says Selma Park and Davis Bay Sewer Functional Plan. And I noticed it's being paid out of funds from the sewer reserve. So we've been looking at having the people who contribute to sewer, parcel tax and sewer rates, et cetera, contribute to the sewer reserve. And the people that are going to actually benefit from this plan do not pay in. So I'm wondering why we're looking at taking $150,000 out of the sewer reserve for this functional plan. And if not, if it's another way we could pay for it.
Certainly how it was set up, and I'll blame this on my prior life in a different municipality where everyone paid sewer rates, so any sewer funded expenses came out of the sewer fund, and water came out of the water fund, et cetera. So honestly, I put this in to be funded from the sewer reserve because it's a sewer related expenditure, not really thinking about the users that are benefiting from this. And I must admit, from that point on, it just kind of went through the deliberations and wasn't noted or discussed, and I really didn't think about it beyond that. If the decision was we could refund it from the capital reserve, which is prior year tax money, there is just sufficient funds in there to take it from that reserve rather than the sewer reserve, if that's the will of council.
I think it's a good point. If we're trying to rationalize the expenditures this year, and it's been a sudden shift for a lot of people, then rationalizing them all the way through would make sense. And whether that area paid that back after the plan was done and they were joined in or not, but finding a way that it was not a burden on current sewer users would be appropriate over the course of the time. I don't know how other councillors feel about that. Do you understand the logic on that one? Councillor Mueller?
Yeah, no, I definitely understand the logic behind it. It's just with where we're at in this process, it seems to me that this is not the time to be asking that question. We've had a number of very informative shirt sleeve sessions with staff on this particular issue, and it was something that we discussed at length. Not this particular aspect, but other aspects of it, in which at that point could have been altered or changed in advance of us adapting the bylaw. So I wouldn't be in favor of changing it now.
We could Keep it in mind, though, and make sure that by the time the reconciliation occurred at the end of the year, that we amended it. I think it's a strong point. So we're not looking for an amendment right now, but just want to know how other councillors feel. Councillor Shanks?
Yeah, I have one concern, Your Worship, and that's under Public Works, and if memory serves, that would include the paving of Scanna Crescent, would that? For $70,000 or $90,000?
Again, that'll be under capital on, not on that.
Oh, this is operating plan, I'm sorry.
Yeah, it'll be on page 49.
Yeah.
Any further discussion of the point that Councillor Seegers wrote in terms of the rationalization of sewer charges and planning? Okay, we'll see if there's an amendment, I hear, but I think we should keep that in mind as we go through 2017. I think if we can reconcile that or amend the bylaw at some later date when you know where it could come from, that would be useful.
Thank you. In 2017 projects, I seem to recollect that we had put some money in for a study on the Mason Road request, and I don't see that in here. That might be my error.
Yes, we specifically excluded all of the West Sechelt, Sandy Hook, and other.
But we have Sandy Hook drainage and Scanna Crescent road paving studies. I thought we had put some funds in, 15,000 or such for a study of, so that we could determine in future years what the cost was going to be to do the changes.
Everybody, Your Worship, actually I've got the minutes here from the meeting, and no, that was not added to the budget. It was simply removed, and no discussion was to add a study at all.
Okay, thank you. Then on page 50, there are 2 dog parks there. Are they the same, or are they 2 separate ones in different locations? It's under 2019.
Actually, Your Worship, I don't know the answer to that one. I was able to get in touch with the Parks Manager prior to this meeting. Certainly being it's in 2019, we can certainly make sure that that's clarified long before the budget is spent in 2019.
Okay, and I have one further question. On page, we've got page 46 and page 54. Page 46 looks at the general fund operating plan. And then on page 54, we've got the operating revenue. And I just want to know how to reconcile the revenue numbers between the two.
Your Worship, page 54 actually is the consolidated operating budget, so it actually includes the revenue from the general fund on page 46 and the sewer revenue from page 47. So 54 is the consolidation of both of those.
Okay. Thank you very much. So.
Okay, Councillor Shanks.
Yeah, thank you very much, Your Worship. No, in terms of the paving of Scanna Crescent in the 2017 projects, I would just like us to have the discussion in terms of our policy as regards paving of roads which currently are not paved. And if we're going to do that, then I would like to see a priority list, because I'm seeing deja vu where Heritage and Sandpiper got paved at the cost of over $600,000 in a previous budget, and I'm not sure that was a wise decision either. So if I have some degree of guarantee that we'll have that discussion in the very near future, I think I'd be satisfied with approving this decision.
Could I ask what your minutes show for that meeting? Because I thought that was discussed at the time, and we did step back.
The minutes show that there was a motion to remove the Scanna paving project from the budget, and that motion was defeated. So it was kept in the budget.
Okay.
So I just asked for the discussion to take place.
Yes, so then the follow-up for that is to ensure that we actually do have a clear policy on paving of unpaved roads, and that there's a priority list that's put in place, and that it's not done in an ad hoc way. And that's what we're trying to avoid. And I didn't know that was defeated. We make too many decisions. Keep track of them all. Any other discussions at first reading? Councillor Mueller.
I just wanted to make a point on that note on Scanna Crescent. As I said in my previous statement, we had numerous amounts of special meetings. All of those minutes and the videos for those meetings, I believe, are available online. Council, I was appreciative of those because Council had a chance to really get into and have a thorough discussion of some of these items. That Scanna Crescent did fail narrowly. That one and a number of these other ones that have been raised tonight also were contentious, but I don't feel this is the venue to rehash those. We had those discussions and accompanied also were votes. So I think that was clear and I was happy with it. It was done at that time.
Okay, those were committee meetings, and it's always appropriate at council to take your final look at things that went through committee as well. So yes, committee is a place where we have deep, full, and detailed discussions, and council is also a place where you're allowed to take that final look. Councillor Shanks.
I think my only point to be made, Your Worship, is this is a change in policy.
Yep.
And that's my only concern, and if we're going to do that on an ad hoc basis, then perhaps we better have a list of those roads that need paving and have that discussion in the near future.
Yeah, that's understood, and I think staff understands it as well. So we're in first reading. All those in favor of first reading? And that's carried. Could I have somebody move second reading of bylaw number 557, 2017? Councillor Lutz and Councillor Wright. Any discussion at second reading, which is normally the place where you'd look for amendments if you were going to make amendments at second reading. Councillor Mueller.
It's not really a point of discussion. I'd like to make statements at second reading so that the community knows why it is that I would be voting as I am. And it's because this is specifically related to our financial plan. It's probably the most important vote that most members of council will make all year. So I think it's important to say why it is that you're supporting this. I'm supporting this budget primarily because it gets us back to a net zero situation. Estimated surplus deficit on the bottom of page 46. By the end of this particular financial plan, we are, for the first time since I've been on council, we're in the positive. Now, I've written quite extensively on what I see as a structural deficit, which is the reduction of capital equity at the bottom of 46, and that is in parentheses. We're going downhill in terms of our the accumulated surplus that the district holds. That's a concern for me because over the long term, we know that's not tenable. We haven't fixed that yet. That still has to come. That's still major work for council to do. But for us to be heading in that direction of our surplus deficit balance finally reaching a positive, that's something that I really can support. I give my hats off to the financial team because it was very difficult for them to balance these numbers. We had to entertain tax increases. We had to do a number of other things to make this work. It wasn't easy, and I'm happy with the work that they did do. Even though it's not a perfect world for me, it's something that I can support. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And Councillor Wright.
Thank you, Your Worship. First of all, I do want to congratulate the Finance Department, considering the number of hats that our Director of Finance was wearing over the last 5 or 6 months. He and the finance team have done a pretty good job bringing this together. I guess I would be remiss if I didn't say we have historically a capacity to do about $2 million worth of work in any given year. This capital budget is about $8 million. Somehow it doesn't appear to me to be very realistic. I'm going to support it despite that. But bear in mind, today is May the 3rd. The year end finishes in December. We have 8 months to do $8 million worth of work with a capacity historically of being able to complete 2. Don't expect it to be done. And I hope next year that the capital budget comes in at a realistic number, that we have the capability of completing in the year with some carryover. But this is the 3rd budget I've seen that's had 4 million, 5 million carryover, and that this is a public document. When the residents of Sechelt see this document, they have an anticipation that these things will be done. And when they're not done, it puts us in a very awkward situation to say, well, why didn't that get done? And we're trying to answer it. Having said that, my compliments to the Finance Department. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Inkster.
Yeah, I guess if a number of us are speaking to the budget that's being presented and approved tonight, those that were not there, that were unable to see it on YouTube, I guess we'll call it, or the video service that we now offer, and or the service that provides just the audio. There was, as has been mentioned, a fair amount of discussion on a number of the items, and at this point it's very difficult to make changes and or not support something that you've worked really hard and raised your points when the discussions came up on many of the items. Moving forward, a number of the items that have been discussed, I hope we have time very soon and going into next year to discuss some of the items such as the road policy that Councillor Shanks mentioned, although I do believe he means on unpaved roads, not paved roads, unless I could be correct. I think you mean unpaved roads, which is the concern you brought up regarding the $600,000 spent on an unpaved road a number of years ago, which in a sense leads me to my concern with our overall budget, that we have some financial issues and concerns going forward over the next number of years. I hope we don't talk about zero for a couple of years again. Very frustrating to me if that's brought up, because we have, as has been clearly demonstrated, we have a budget that may mean a couple of, hopefully not as large tax increases, but tax increases in order to deal with some of our challenges. The challenges that we have within our budget has also meant that there will be not only an additional residential tax, which if people clearly look in their tax information that they receive, that a lot of it has to do with sewer. So I hope that's explained with the information that goes out, and I'm sure it will be. I'm sure the mayor will speak to that. But I hope it's clear to the community when they read all the lines within the tax information to see where some of the increases are. And the unfortunate challenges with our budget has meant that there's some inflexibility now with some of our business, some of our multipliers that includes business. And I think we took a step back this year. That's just something I spoke to. I'll leave it at that. I'm supporting the budget, but I think we took a step back this year because we were supposed to keep it at a lower level. We're unable to with our other challenges. So it's a difficult budget. It's one of my hardest budget pills. I would say it's probably my hardest budget pills to swallow, followed in second and third place by zero budgets in times that we shouldn't have done that. So I have to support this. We put a lot of work into it. And as a council, a lot of shirt sleeves, as was mentioned, a lot of hard work. I'll support it, but I hope that we start early dealing with some of the concerns that have been brought forward by council over the last number of months regarding our expenditures and our forward budget look. So thanks for allowing me to speak to this.
Thank you for that. Any other councillors on second reading? And Councillor Lutz.
I too support this budget, and I thank staff for the work, and I thank the fellow councillors because we did have very full discussion and eliminated a lot of things from the beginning of this budget process. So I think we've done a really good job. There's always more you can do, and there's next year when we'll do it.
And Councillor Seegers.
Thank you. I generally support this budget. The one that I brought up earlier was the $150,000. I'm not in favor of having that come out of the sewer reserve. And I'm wondering if there's an appetite at the table here to modify where that's being paid from. So I would put forward a motion that instead of being funded by sewer reserve, I believe our director of finance said we could take it out of capital reserve.
That's correct, Your Worship.
Okay, so rather than out of sewer reserve, being funded out of capital reserve. Thank you.
Is there anyone to second that? I suspect most of us are feeling that it's doesn't have time for a thought that it probably does, even though we've heard from the corporate and financial services, and not that we don't disagree with the rationale, but something that we can always amend budgets over the course of the year if we have a full discussion, unless there's somebody to second it tonight. Seeing none, thank you for bringing it up again. And on second reading, any final comments? If I misspoke on saying unpaved roads too quietly, I meant unpaved roads, that policy. And yes, as Councillor Inkster reminded us, this financial plan contemplates a minimum 3% tax increase for the next 5 years. That's the minimum, just so you know. And then as we move forward and deal with some of the other challenges, there may be, but that's just for the capital and the infrastructure, and dealing with the amortization issues that Councillor Mueller pointed out on the bottom of page 46. And in order to get to that surplus spot on capital, it's going to require a minimum 3% increase going forward. Any further discussion on second reading? All those in favor? And that's carried. Any opposed? One opposed. And moving to item 8.1B is our financial, sorry, yeah, that was 2. Now we have 2017 tax rates bylaw number 558, 2017. Yes. Oh, sorry. Third, yeah. Okay. And we'll fix the typo on third reading. That's why I missed it.
You got the typo. Thank you.
That's why I didn't do third reading. I couldn't read it. Okay. Yeah. Somebody to move third reading of bylaw number 557, 2017, a bylaw to adopt the financial plan for the years 2017 to 21. Councillor Lutz, Councillor Wright. All those in favor of third reading? And any opposed? One opposed. And that's carried. Well, yes, she's given it twice, 3 times. It's on the sewer. Yep, yep. No, we have to wait. The special meeting we're having next week is for adoption, May 10th. We have to have at least 24 hours in between third reading and adoption. So that moves us now to item 8.16, 8.1C. District of Sechelt, 2017 Tax Rates Bylaw number 558, a bylaw for establishing tax rates for municipal, hospital, Sunshine Coast Regional District, Sunshine Coast Regional Recreation and Fire Improvement District purposes for the year 2017. And the rates are set out in the columns and the sections on page 58. So we know. Somebody to move first, staff, corporate services, corporate officer.
Your Worship, before Council considers readings, I would respectfully request that we make an amendment to typos on the bottom of page 57. Should say read a first time, read a second time, read a third time instead of all first. So, thank you.
So somebody to move first reading. Councillor Wright, Councillor Shanks. And again, the actual rates are set out on page 58. All those in favor? That's carried. Any opposed? And somebody to move second reading. Councillor Shanks, Councillor Lutz. Any amendments at second reading? I'd hate to see somebody amend the tax rates. Actually, that's pretty complicated technical mill rates. All those in favor of second reading? That's carried. Any opposed? Too late. I'll do this right this time. Third reading is moved by Councillor Seegers, seconded by Councillor Wright. All those in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. Item D, which is Solid Waste Management Collection Bylaw. I'd like somebody to move first reading of bylaw number 58.1, 2017, a bylaw to provide for the control, collection, and disposal of solid waste and recyclables. And I saw Councillor Wright and Councillor Seegers second. Any discussion at first reading? Any more errors? It's a one-pager. All those in favor of first reading? That's carried. Somebody to move second reading, Councillor Shanks and Councillor Lutz. Any discussion at second reading? All those in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. And third reading is moved by Councillor Shanks and seconded by Councillor Wright. All those in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. And our final, no, two more. Item 8.1E, somebody to move bylaw number 559, 2017, a bylaw to impose a parcel tax on owners of land. Councillor Mueller and Councillor Lutz, and this is the parcel tax on sewer users or those who live within the merged sewer specified area bylaw. All those in favor of first reading? Any opposed? One opposed? That's carried. Somebody to move second reading. Councillor Mueller and Lutz again on second reading of bylaw number 559. Any discussion at second reading? Councillor Seegers.
Thank you. I think I made it clear during the discussions that I was not in favor of the way we're moving a lot of the cost to the parcel tax rather than the user fees. So I won't be supporting either of those. I do know that we need the funds. I'm just not in favor of the way the split is coming down. Thank you.
Any further discussion at second reading? All those in favor? Any opposed? That's carried with one opposed. That was second reading. And third reading is moved by Councillor Wright and Councillor Lutz. All those in favor of third reading?
Sorry.
That's, yeah, too fast. Any opposed? One opposed. That's carried. And item 8.1F, District of Sechelt bylaw number 42614, 2017, a bylaw to set fees for sewerage usage. Moved for first reading by Councillor Wright and Councillor Lutz. Any discussion at first reading? It's a one-page document. All those in favor of first reading? Any opposed? One opposed. That's carried. Second reading is moved by, I haven't talked this much for a long time, Councillor Mueller and Councillor Lutz. Second reading. All those in favor? And one opposed. That's carried. And third reading of bylaw number 42614 is moved by Councillor Wright, seconded by Councillor Mueller. All those in favor? And one opposed. That's carried. And the schedules for that are on page 64, 65, and forward. Now, item 10.1, complicated issue. It's been brewing in the back rooms for a few weeks. Procedural fairness. Let's start with the motion to receive the report from the interim community planner. Councillor Lutz, Councillor Wright. All those in favor? Thank you very much, and we look to Aaron Thompson, interim community planner, for a brief report.
Thank you, Your Worship. So the purpose of this report is to bring an issue of procedural fairness to light regarding several of our development applications here in the district. Based off of the fact that we've received new information that affects several of these applications, the ones listed here, including the Westbrook by the Sea, the Rockwood Ocean Storage Project, several other rezoning applications from Clay and Family Lands, that some bylaws will need to have their third reading rescinded, as mentioned in my recommendations, and then go forward back to public hearing. Bylaws which haven't received third reading will also just need to require an additional public hearing. This, again, to repeat, is stemming from the traffic impact study, which was recently completed and received by council at the last open council meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And this has been difficult, just so people know. There's been various standards in the District of Sechelt over the last 20 years in terms of when various technical studies and transportation studies, et cetera, are done for major developments. In this case, there was major transportation study that a number of developments were awaiting on, and we'd moved forward on some of those in advance of the transportation study. When it did come, for a number of reasons, we were advised and sought legal counsel that rather than proceed with our initial recommendation, which was to have the transportation in place prior to adoption, we've been informed that it requires a second public hearing if we're to avoid challenges. So that's the reason for this course of action. I'd look to somebody on council to move recommendations 2 through 6, and then we'll have discussion. Councillor Mueller, Councillor Inkster, and discussion. I see Councillor Seegers.
Thank you. I was presented with some information today, and I believe our planner also has that information, that would seem to indicate that while we did get a legal review of this, and this was the advice that was our legal counsel gave, that there is a case that actually went to the Supreme Court of BC that would potentially indicate an alternate action or course of action on the part of the municipality. I haven't had a lot of time to read it, so I mean I skimmed through it, but I'd like to hear from the planner, and if possible, potentially we could defer this to the next meeting. I don't know if that's something that we want to do at this time, but it may be something we should consider. Thanks.
First, we'll let the planner respond whether he knows about the case and whether I'm sure it was considered by our legal counsel.
Yeah. Thank you, Your Worship. Similar to Councillor Seegers, I also didn't have too much time to review the case. It was a case law that had a different situation than what we're facing, so I do not believe that case is relevant to this, as I believe in that case, the council didn't want the information, that the information that that could have been considered new information wasn't actually ever presented to council. They never received it. They didn't want to see it, and they thought it had no effect on their decision. That's hence why they didn't want to see it. I'm not sure if our legal counsel reviewed it or not, similar case, but...
Do you or Councillor Seegers know the date of that case?
1992. It was under the Municipal Act as well.
Okay.
So
thank you. That's the most important question.
Yeah, it was the District of Delta versus Jones, I believe.
Yeah, it was reviewed by our council.
Okay.
Councillor Inkster.
Our legal counsel.
Yes, by our legal counsel.
Okay.
If it had been a fresh case, I would
Yeah,
consider it differently.
92, that's, and it's been, as you've indicated, been reviewed. Last minute information in these critical issues. I mean, I'm looking for a solution to this that would, lead me to ask questions in terms of when, if in fact I mean, first of all, we have to make sure that the admission of the traffic study that's presented is valid and clear. We have to make sure of that. But the second piece to it is that, I mean, we received this last minute information. I would have hoped we would have, if it was available and the case was available, that we would have been sent it. So Councillor Seegers, if you had it, to have forwarded it to us. I mean, even at that, with the busy meeting day, it would have been hard to give it due and proper consideration, but that would have been probably helpful. And just moving forward, when we move forward in the future, that's what I would like to see, is if somebody gets relevant information to make this an easier process, not only for the district, but for the proponents, that we somehow be given due consideration, because I don't know where it came from, this case, and why it popped up, but it's just on the day of the meeting in which we're deciding. So that's just my concern under the due consideration rule. My question was, though, through you, perhaps to planning staff and maybe our corporate officer, is tonight, are we able to determine tonight when these public hearings will occur, or do they go back through the regular process? And that having been asked, will we be, or is there an appetite for, because these have already been done and we have identified some concerns in those previous public hearings, not only by rereading the material and or being present at those meetings, will we be looking at stacking public hearings in order to deal with a number of these issues which are dealing with the procedural fairness issue? And if we do in fact stack them in order to get them in a sense and put forward in a timely manner, what is the limit in terms of stacking of public hearings?
I think you mean having them all in one evening?
Well,
just to be clear,
yes,
when you say
sure.
stacking.
Let's
I've
throw
stacked
the
a lot of
extreme
public
example
hearings
out
and
there.
just-
Yeah.
Okay. Staff, can you answer the one on timing? And I don't think they've determined that because we haven't approved this decision yet.
Well, okay, I just thought that they may have, because of the nature of this particular issue and the fact that we've already went through the public hearings and we
Do
have
you
concerns.
have a preferred date?
Yes.
Your Worship, at this time, we do not have a date for the public hearings, and in my recommendations, I'm not asking for authorization to schedule a public hearing, as there's still some details to work out with the individual proponents.
That's the other side of this coin, is that once the transportation study is there, of course, every developer wants to look at it and see how it applies and if it's fair and if it's appropriate. So it's not just information to us, it's new information for the developers, and they're considering it as well. So there's two sides to this process. Councillor Shanks, I think, is next. No, Councillor Lutz.
Thank you.
And then Councillor Seekers, then Councillor Shanks.
I realize that this has been an awful lot of work for our staff, and I really appreciate that they've brought it forward and that the groups involved will also have the opportunity to look at the traffic study. It's major around this decision, and I think it's appropriate that we go before the public with this information and have let the public have the opportunity to speak to the information. So thank you.
And councillors, thank you for those comments, Councillor Lutz. Councillor Seekers.
Thank you. I'd like to address Councillor Inkster's comments.
Yes.
So this report came out to the public on Friday, as it came out to us. And they read it over the weekend. It took them some time to gather some information. I got the information like early afternoon today in hard copy. So I've skimmed it. I know our staff have skimmed it. I don't know at this point whether it's pertinent or not. It seems that there may be some pieces in there that we would want to look at before we actually make this decision. So I'm not asking council to approve or disapprove this at this time. I was looking to perhaps move this forward to the next council meeting to give our staff time to review this, to see whether or not it is something that is pertinent. That's what I was bringing forward. Thanks.
Thank you for that clarification. And Councillor Shanks?
Thank you very much, Your Worship. Two or three things are bothering me about this, one of which is I'm not sure how the legal counsel, access to legal counsel was precipitated in the first place on our staff's behalf or by our staff, or if in fact somebody out there was willing to challenge some of the decisions that have been made in terms of moving this forward without council having that traffic study and traffic impact study done and presented before council before a public hearing. And on paragraph number 1, 2, 3 on page 67, it indicates starting in 2016, the Planning and Development Service Department has often recommended the inclusion of traffic impact studies, so forth and so on and so on. And that council has the information that is required to make an informed decision. So I know we've had a turnover in staff, but at no time has that point been brought forward in terms of requiring the traffic impact study be put before council before a public hearing. So there's 2 or 3 concerns there, and I'm still worried and concerned about how and why it was precipitated that we contact and get legal counsel on this particular issue. That's my concern. And if it's from somebody was willing to challenge these things going forward because they perceived that council didn't have all the information, then I guess I'd like to know that, so.
It's my understanding that this was a staff decision based on their review of the facts, and it was not precipitated by a community member challenging the public hearings or potentially challenging the public hearings. And we want to avoid that, but that is not the case, which is why we think that, and why staff recommendation is we can get through the public hearings without much further ado and still follow the process and follow the guidelines that are suggested in terms of procedural fairness. In reference to a Supreme Court of BC decision that was made 25 years ago before the community charter was even written, I don't think it will affect our review of this issue very seriously. That's pretty old case law for this kind of stuff, which has been moving quite a bit in the last decade. So we have on the floor recommendations 2 through 6, and Councillor Mueller is, and Councillor Wright is contemplating thinking, and Councillor Mueller is ready to speak.
Yes, thank you.
Sorry, I misspoke.
So there's been a few points raised here tonight. For myself, a file that I've never seen that addresses 25-year-old case law is likely not going to stand up towards the type of legal opinion that we received on this one. I'm going to be supporting this moving ahead, and it is with trepidation, mainly because of the applicants that it affects. I know that on the whole, it's going to improve our planning process, and perhaps there's more additional things we need to do to improve the planning process just to make this more streamlined. It has been difficult for the applicants, and that's my biggest concern here. However, I have been impressed since I've been here on the council seat with the various types of arm's length governance provided by the provincial government. And on this particular one, it is logically important for traffic studies and other types of studies to come before the community and become part of that decision-making process in front of the community. These things can precipitate changes in the decisions of councils, as well as changes to the actual landscape of the community that need to be borne in mind when the whole decision is made. So for myself, it is logical, it's reasonable. So I'll be supporting it.
Thank you for those comments, and Councillor Wright.
Well, thank you, Your Worship.
I meant to say he was contemplating speaking. He had been thinking for some time, but he's contemplating speaking to the issue.
Thank you, Your Worship, for those kind words. At any rate, I guess that we're in a position when we have legal counsel that tells us that we should be following this process. It doesn't leave us a whole lot of choice unless we're prepared to take a challenge, potentially. So I guess reluctantly, I'm going to support the recommendation. I guess I have a question under the financial plan, and the statement says here that application and copying fees bylaw number 333 sets out a fee of $750 for additional public hearings. I hope that we would at least give some consideration to waiving that cost for the proponents, because that just rubs salt in the wound, I'm sorry. And it's bad enough that we have to go through this process without laying some additional charge on the proponents. I hope we'll give some thought to that.
Okay.
Thank you.
If this recommendations go forward, I'll look to you to make a motion regarding waiving the fees and see if that's supported. So any further discussion on the recommendations before us, which is to rescind third reading of zoning bylaw number 25/1987, 25/268, 25/278, 25/277, and ensure that before any additional public hearing, the RTC project, which is bylaw number 25/274, receives a traffic study and an update. Just want to make sure you know what you're voting on. All those in favor of the recommendations? And any opposed to the recommendations? And that's carried. And Councillor Wright, would you like to see if council supports your notion of waiving the public hearing fees? Would I take that as a motion to waive?
Thank you, Worship. Yes, I'd like to propose that council consider waiving the fees for this additional public hearing. And I think, thank you, I'll just let it go at that.
And I have a seconder from Councillor Mueller. Any discussion? I think the reasons are obvious. This is largely in part procedural internal to the district of Sechelt as we learn and develop, and some of it has to do with staff changes and staff turnover. It's not the developers that are causing this second reading, is what I'm trying to say. Councillor Mueller.
Yeah, of course, I'll be supporting this because I believe it's logical and reasonable that we would do that. Waiving the fees is at this point what we need to do. This is something that affects both parties, but clearly we want to ease the burden where we can. Additionally, I think it's important that we try to get these back on our agenda as soon as we can, and proceed with the public hearings if this vote passes, and get moving on these. Thanks.
Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Just discussion.
Oh, further discussion before I count the vote?
Yeah, we just had a little query about what those fees include. And so we know that there's costs that are levied to the developer in this particular case. Yep. That's why there's a proposal to waive. Do those fees include the advertising that we have to do legally? Is that what that then includes?
It helps to cover a number of the costs to do, not all of the costs, but a number of the costs of staff time and advertising and hall rental if we don't have to use one of our buildings. A number of costs. There will be costs to the district.
Okay.
Now, further discussion? I'll check for the vote then. All those in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. Thank you for that, and thank you for your patience. What was our motion? No, yeah, no, the 1 second before that. Was it recommendations 2 to 5 or 2 to 6? Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Always good to clarify, or we'll come back in 2 weeks and we'll wonder if we've done it. Moving on, item 10.2, also to do with fairness. Request for the decision first, a motion to receive a report from the corporate officer. Councillor Shanks, thank you, and seconded by Councillor Seegers. All those in favor? And I'll ask Ms. Frank, our corporate officer, to speak.
Thank you, Your Worship. My report sets out the details regarding this subject matter, and based on that, staff is requesting that Council rescind an earlier resolution that would no longer apply.
Thank you for that. And can I have somebody move that? I'd recommend we do. Councillor Inkster, Councillor Mueller. Any discussion? All those in favor? Thank you. Councillor Seegers.
Thank you. Through you to our corporate officer, do we then need a motion to that the online and citizen satisfaction results be released and posted online? Or is that kind of follow from that automatically?
Based on past practice, there's no reason for council to pass a resolution. It's not necessary because we do have a communications manager who works closely with the CAO and mayor to develop our methods of releasing any documents. But that said, it's certainly within council's purview if you'd like to do so.
Yeah, I think this is a staff decision at this point, so we'll just let them do it as routine as they should have. Moving on to item 11.1, which is councillors' reports. And if I could start on my right with Councillor Lutz and move to the left. Councillor Lutz.
Thank you. Fairly busy couple of weeks, committee meetings, and I also attended a thank you that the search and rescue did on the weekend. The weather was rather poor, but the turnout was good, and it was great to spend a bit of time with those hardworking people. That was on Sunday. On Saturday, April 28th, it's the day of mourning, and I attended the service that was, again, presented by the Sunshine Coast Labor Council in Gibsons. And it again brought to mind that I think as a community, we need to look at having a marker in our own ceremony here in Sechelt. So I've got a few people interested in working on that with me. And I'll have some discussion with council and staff around how we could best do that. I also attended the public meeting around keeping our health care in the public domain with two very good speakers, a fairly good turnout. And on one of the sunny days this week, I think it was on Tuesday, I started some of my broom busting. Didn't get a lot done. This old girl's not quite as physically fit as she hoped, but we'll keep working on it. That's my report.
Thank you. And Councillor Mueller.
Yes, thank you, Worship. Don't have that much to report. It was relatively unpopulated council last 2 weeks, so I attended the meetings like the rest of council. And that's all I have to report.
Thank you very much. And Councillor Seegers.
Thank you. I'd reiterate that. I did attend a couple of the election forums, and just to see how the various candidates presented themselves to the public under different topics. So I think I've attended 3 in the last few weeks, and it's quite interesting to see how they interact with each other. I actually, at one point said, I'm wondering now, they had 8 of them, if they're carpooling together to go to them, but they didn't respond. That's all I have to report. Thanks.
And Councillor Wright, thank you for that report. Councillor Wright.
Well, thank you, Your Worship. There was a number of meetings, finance, planning and development, public works. Also attended the day of mourning ceremony, and also an all candidates meeting, and that was a fun time. And then I've met with about half a dozen residents of Sechelt who called me up and asked if I would meet with them. None of them were developers, though, Your Worship. So that concludes my report.
And thank you for that report. And Councillor Inkster.
Yeah, it's good to see the election forums that were mentioned and what the candidates talk about what they're going to do in our riding, because those that are elected, we can obviously remind them of some of the things they discussed. And I hope, based on some of their platforms, that they are carpooling, but we'll see what that comes up with. There was a number of committee meetings that we all went to over the last few weeks. The day of mourning was on Friday, and it was actually quite a nice day, which is probably for a good reason, to make sure that there was people out there talking about such an important issue. It was actually one of the few nice days in the last few days. So I guess the powers that be wanted to make sure that happened. Also, it's also good that I would encourage all. I know that Councillor Lutz is always there, probably one of the organizers, I'm assuming. But I would encourage many of council to go every time, much like any other event, to recognize some of the things that have happened in our community, but also to the show support to the volunteers. Much as to why I went to the library volunteer tea I think it was the previous Friday, to be part of the group that thanks the volunteers for all the work they do, not only in the library, but the Friends of the Library. And I think the information about what kind of money the Friends of the Library raises is available, and I do have the information if any council wants to see, because I think they're, as it looks right now, other than bequeathments and other forms of large donations, it's probably the big fundraiser for our library. So it's important for council to get a picture of some of the fundraising activities, how hard that group works and how much they actually bring in on an annual basis. They work very hard to raise, I think, $20,000 to $30,000 a year. I also wanted to mention the event that I was at today before a couple of our meetings is McHappy Day. I'm not sure who was all there. It's just based on what I saw. I know Councillor Wright, I took his place. And just wanted to remind council and the community why I go. We talked about some figures today, and in the last year on the Sunshine Coast, that's Upper and Lower, 26 families went to, I think it's called Ronald McDonald House in the last year, and I think 17 were from Paul River, and I'm assuming that's because of distance, even though their population is slightly less than ours, and 9 were from the Lower Coast. And I think it was 1,740 province-wide families went last year. And the statistics that I'm providing to you are based on at least a week's stay at Ronald McDonald's House. So that's 26, at least 1 week stays from those families, and 1,740 1 week stays to go spend time with their sick children. So that's why I go, and that's why I encourage all to either volunteer at one of those events or at least donate to those events and our Ronald McDonald House, because of how well the service is used and how good the service is used to give support for families with in need and in crisis. So I think it's a really important event. There will be one next year and for every year, and it's a really good cause. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I'm glad you and Councillor Wright could support McHappy Days. Councillor Shanks.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. Nothing of real political importance to report, but an amusing incident last night is, as you know, I have a couple of older cars, and I was driving home my 54 Ford Custom Line, which is mint green. And at Davis Bay Pier, there were 50 or 60 Green Party supporters there. And as I went by, they were giving me thumbs up, and I was giving them thumbs up and pointing at the car. And so I thought that was a little amusing. So 50 or 60 people probably went away thinking, Mike Shanks is a Green Party supporter, you know. But I never let that known who I do support. So that's all I have to report, Your Worship.
Thank you. The provincial election brings all sorts of interesting opportunities for things. I'm glad there's been a provincial election. I've also been attending events, see what I can learn. It's also been a very busy week, but I don't think too many formal meetings, but like Councillor Wright, the citizens must be getting anxious or something. I've had quite a few. I've had knocks on my door. I've had phone calls on an unlisted number. It's been a busy couple of weeks for some reason, I don't know, and conversations in grocery stores about traffic calming in residential neighborhoods and highway, all sorts of neighborhood concerns. So moving on to the SCRD board, Council Representative Director Wright, anything to report from the SCRD?
Thank you, Worship. Now the list gets real long. Infrastructure Committee meeting, Police Commission, Transportation Committee, Corporate Admin Services Committee, Hospital Board board meeting, SCRD board meeting, Sechelt Indian Government SCRD meeting. We had a lunch and meeting with the new chief and councilors, and it was a kind of a very frank, open, friendly discussion. And so you alluded to possibly doing something similar with our council. I mentioned that to them, that we might be in touch with them about that, and they're quite open to that. And then also the swearing-in ceremony for the Sechelt Indian Government Regional District Representative. I've got a number of reports of significance. Some of the phone calls that I alluded to earlier had to do with the Chapman Lake water expansion, which they haven't got approval for, so it was supposed to have been done September of last year. Now it's September of this year, but they still don't have approval, so it likely is going to be September of 2018, maybe. So I have that report in here. I'll give that to the CAO, and he can have a browse through it. Anybody who wants to see it can have a look at it. There is also a Chapman Creek water flow analysis. There's also a report on the success that they've had with leaks in their water meter project. 20% saving, 21% savings in North Pender alone. That report will be there if somebody would like to see it. Transportation, the fixed link study, it's due sometime in the spring. That's all they would say to us. The hospital board was just a financial audit. Corporate and mid-services, there was an interesting report in here regarding the distribution of legal plans. Apparently the Land Titles Act has told the regional district that they're not allowed to pass out legal descriptions for things like subdivisions to developers. And there's a report in here, and that'll probably have an impact on us. And then they gave first reading to some OCP amendments for Elphinstone, Pender Harbor, Egmont, and Roberts Creek. Spent 2 hours at Ronald McDonald House today, and that was a fun time. They put you on the front counter, and you get to meet all these people that you haven't seen, and that was probably the highlight. So having said all of that, I managed to finish laying my hardwood floor in my living room, dining room, and TV room. And that concludes my report.
So with the hardwood floor in place, there'll be a party at Doug's and Lena's place, dancing on the new floor.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for that report from the SCRD and the reference to McHappy Days as well. So moving on, item 12.1, release of closed camera or in-camera resolutions, and we have a recommendation for 3 to be released. I've had Councillor Seegers moving that, seconded by Councillor Mueller. That's on page 71, just so we're all aware. All those in favor? That's carried. And we move to council correspondence. A motion to receive. Councillor Seegers, Councillor Wright. All those in favor? And any of those that council would like to see pulled out for either discussion or ensure they get appropriate action. We've got quite a few regarding the Chanterelle Forest. We did talk to the Community Forest Board today, some of them, the chair. And boats sinking. Okay, Councillor Seegers.
Thank you. I'd say number 6, 7, and 9, just for staff to acknowledge and address the issues, concerns. And I mean, number 9 is a thank you that we should forward on to our garbage collection.
Okay, anything
And number
else?
16 as well,
And
sorry.
16, yes. So just so as a reminder, of course, when council correspondence comes through, staff has dealt with it from an administrative point of view, but it's also coming for our attention if we need something to pull out for additional things. So hopefully these people have all had their acknowledgements, and some will have had more detailed responses to their answers, questions. Moving to item 14. Motion to adjourn. Councillor Seegers and Mueller, all those in favor. And then it says public question and answer period. I have a question for the public tonight. Please, Pam.